He woke up to the sound of someone breathing behind the wall, slowly, hoarsely, with a gurgling sound. He lay motionless, unable to feel his legs. The breathing continued. It seemed to be getting closer. The maid, sitting in the shadows, was trembling, but she remained silent. Louis XV, King of France, 60 years old, could not move or call for help. His tongue was swollen and his throat was constricted. A lamp smoked in the corner, and the air smelled of iron and mold. There was no one behind the wall, only illness, only he and she. The King of France was dying. In the winter of 1482, when Paris did not yet know that he was no longer ruling, Louis was locked in his tower in Plessis-les-Tours, under guard, without access to ambassadors, and with almost no servants. Rumors circulated that he had been poisoned, that he prayed at night, that he ate only bread dipped in holy water. In fact, he did not eat at all. He could not swallow. The mucous membrane of his throat was ulcerated, and every attempt caused vomiting. Food flowed back out, mixed with blood. His tongue was covered with gray spots. His eyes were cloudy. A purulent fluid flowed from his nose. He was holding on with his last ounce of strength. The doctors who were allowed into his chambers wrote, "His liver is swollen, his urine is foul-smelling, black and flaky, his pulse is weak, and his breathing is labored. The skin on his chest is darkening. There are bed sores on his back, down to the bone." Bloodletting did not help. After the third time, he lost consciousness for 6 hours. When he regained consciousness, he ordered all his linen to be burned and the doors to be closed. The physician Rose from Touraine later noted in his notes, "He is no longer afraid of pain, he is only afraid of what will come at night." Every night he ordered 3 lamps to be lit. An armed servant had to stand silently behind the curtain. There were no icons left in the room, only an iron cross attached to the wall. Louis himself did not look at it. His lips whispered prayers, but his ear was not turned toward heaven. It was turned toward the floor. He could hear the dead stirring below. He could hear them rising. He could hear them calling his name. He knew who they had come for. Louis was afraid of death. He did not believe he would be forgiven. He ordered all his denunciations and secret decrees, kept in a secret room under the fortress of Chinon, to be burned. He ordered the destruction of the portraits of all the people he had executed without trial, especially women, especially priests. He no longer believed in the forgiveness of sins. He asked only that death not be instantaneous, that he have time to repent, and that no one hear him do so. Those around him were silent. There were no ministers or dukes left at court. Everyone had fled or was waiting. The heir, Charles, was too young and weak. His mother was removed from affairs. The chief treasurer was in Amboise. Ambassadors from Naples, Aragon, and Savoy stood outside the walls, waiting for an audience that had not been granted for 3 months. The reports of the Milan embassy noted, "There is no government in the castle of Plessis. There lies flesh, and it breathes, but it no longer speaks." Among the few who entered the chambers was Mathieu's servant. He later revealed that everything was rotting under the bandages. There were worms in the wounds, and the king knew about it. He asked not to remove them, saying that it was punishing flesh. His body smelled of vinegar, honey, and death. The bandages were changed every 4 hours. Slime oozed from his armpits. There were ulcers in his groin covered with gnats. On his back were 3 open wounds from which pus and blood flowed. His legs were swollen and blackened. The doctors insisted on amputation, but Louis forbade it. "Let them take me whole." Sometimes he fell into a delirium. He screamed, "My father died in hell. I heard him moaning. I won't go to him." He called out to those who had been executed. He whispered names that had long been forgotten in Paris. He spoke to those whom he had personally sent to the gallows. Once he woke up screaming, "Don't hang me, I'm already dead." After that, he didn't eat or drink for a day, only cried. His saliva turned black. The clerks to whom he dictated his last orders complained that they did not understand his words. He was losing his speech. He repeated, "My heart is iron, but inside it is rusting." According to legend, he ordered an iron hoop to be cast and placed on his chest. The priest, Jérôme de Mont, later wrote about this. "I saw this hoop. It was heavy and lay on his ribs. Digging in, he said, 'This is my crown.' But the crown pressed harder and harder. In February, his lungs began to rot. He wheezed with every breath. The wheezing did not go away, even when he was sitting. He could no longer lie down. He sat for days on end, tied to a chair with straps. His urine flowed out on its own, and his excrement was wiped away in silence. His shame disappeared. Only fear remained. He did not ask what would happen to France, only how much time he had left. And then, one evening, he ordered, 'Call him.' Everyone knew who he meant. The confessor, who had been dismissed earlier for preaching too leniently. He entered. He left 2 hours later, pale. He didn't say a word, only, 'He doesn't need God. He needs the dead to forgive him.' After that, Louis fell into a stupor. His skin became cold, but his heart was still beating. The doctors said, 'He is still alive, but only his body.' Thus ended the first week. He did not die. He was just rotting, and silent, and waiting. Outside the windows, France was still in bloom, but in the tower of Plessis-le-Tour, decay was setting in. On the 4th night of March, when the moon hung over the walls of Plessis and the wind blew against the bars, screams began to echo from the window of the royal tower. The guards on the lower floor decided that someone had broken in, but no one entered or left. It was he who was screaming in delirium, not in his own voice, with a hoarse cry that was not words. Witness Gilles Fournier, one of the clockmakers on duty at the stairs, recorded, "He moaned incessantly, like a bull before slaughter, and it felt as if someone was tearing the air out of him. No doctors were called. They knew they would be of no help. This was not an illness. This was a trial." Mathieu's servant, who was allowed into the king's chambers in the morning, found him lying in his own urine, his hands clenched in convulsions. His eyes were rolled back, his lips were blue, but he was still breathing. Blood was pouring from his mouth in clots. His whole body was covered in bruises. His back was covered in blisters that had burst during the night. His groin was swollen and smelled of rot. When Mathieu bent over, the king grabbed him by the throat. He was weak, but furious. Then he let go and whispered, "I will repent, but not before him, only before the one I burned." Later, in the notes of the physician Roger de Turenne, there is an entry. He began to talk to the air. He listed names, dates, sins. He asked to have his chest cut open and his heart removed. He said, "It is dead, but there are worms moving in it." This was not a metaphor. The doctor witnessed movement in the chest area. Necrosis began under the iron hoop he had ordered to be put on. The skin under the metal rotted. Internal heat ate away at the muscles, and when the hoop was removed, part of the rib was already exposed. By the 7th week of his illness, he was no longer eating at all. Enemas had no effect. He stopped urinating. Pus accumulated in his body. The skin cracked on his shoulders and burst on his buttocks. His feet were covered with ulcers, through which his bones were visible. The wounds were cleaned by hand. The bandages were torn off along with the flesh. He no longer moaned. He only whispered. Mathieu's servant left for a monastery after the 3rd dressing. He developed a fever. He did not survive. At court, they called him the dead man on the throne. No one went to Plessis anymore. Embassies stopped requesting audiences. Documents bearing Louis' seal were no longer valid. The princes gathered in Amboise to discuss the regency. The Duke of Brittany offered the regency to his son. Cardinal Anjou insisted on ecclesiastical guardianship. Charles' mother tried to obtain an audience with her husband, but she was refused. He let no one in. Even his confessor was no longer called. Only one person recorded everything that was happening, Brother Dominique. By order of the king himself, he was not allowed to speak. He only wrote. His diary has been preserved in the archives of Turin. It contains the following lines. He asked me not to pray. He forbade me to pronounce the name of the Lord. He said he was not worthy. He called himself a dog that had devoured the bones from the altar. In the 9th week of his illness, his body began to decay rapidly. The air in his chambers was poisonous. His bandages were changed, wearing respirators filled with vinegar and lavender. The doctors no longer applied ointments. They only cauterized the wounds with red-hot iron to stop the pus. The skin was coming away from the bones on his shoulders. His fingers turned black. His hands were immobile. His eyelids were swollen. One eye was glassy. The other had popped out. He remained conscious. He repeated, "I am dead. I am just not buried." His last decrees were incoherent. He demanded that the chapel in Chinon be demolished, that all hermit orders be banned, that the Bishop of Rouen be crucified. Then he demanded that everything be cancelled. Then he demanded that everything be burned. No one obeyed. There was no longer any authority. No one feared him. They waited for him. Only death. But death did not come. In the 10th month of his illness, the final phase began. His liver was destroyed. His kidneys were failing. His heart was beating irregularly. He was breathing no more than 4 times a minute. His lips were blue. The skin on his chest was falling off. A mold-colored mass was oozing from a wound on his stomach. Flies lay eggs. They are not killed. He orders them to be left alone. Let them eat. It will be quicker. He does not die immediately. He is in agony for almost 3 days. On his last night, he is silent. Then he exhales. Once, his body stops moving. The doctors wait. 5 hours pass. Then they declare him dead. There is no coffin. There is no washing. There are no clothes. They wrap him in a cloth soaked in tar. They make a coffin out of boards taken from the wall. They do not put a seal on it. They do not write his name. There is no procession. There is no funeral. He was dead, but France was not. People who have rotted away while still alive are rarely buried in the world. The body of Louis XVIII lay in a closed coffin for 3 days in the lower part of Plessis-le-Tour, lined with lead and with holes cut in it to allow the gas to escape. But none of these measures stopped the decomposition. The cloth wrapped around the body was charred by its own vapors. The bones creaked beneath the swollen liquid flesh. The edges of the boards bent under the internal pressure. When the lid was lifted to replace the wrapping, according to Brother Dominic, a vapor smelling of rot and honey burst into the air, so acrid that one of the acolytes lost consciousness and died the next day. They refused to bury him in Saint-Denis. The abbot sent a note. The rules forbid placing the accursed among the sanctified. They did not even agree to accept gold. Then the body was secretly taken to the Abbey of Notre-Dame de Cluny, but they did not accept it there either. In the end, he was buried at dawn in the basement of the monastery of Saint-Martin-de-Tours, in a chapel previously used as a repository for relics. No services were held. No tombstone was erected. Years later, when Charles VIII ordered a tombstone to be made, it was installed with errors. The name was missing the number, and the date was missing the year. No one corrected it. Louis's death was not the end of fear, but the beginning of chaos. During his lifetime, while the kingdom rotted from within, it was held together by orders, written by a hand that trembled but still held a pen. After his death, the pen fell, and everything that had been held together collapsed. The councils in Amboise split. The Duke of Brittany refused to recognize Charles's authority, citing unconsecrated succession. The Duke of Orleans began to gather troops. The army, left without pay, scattered. The cardinals convened a meeting, but the papal legate did not arrive. A report sent from Avignon stated, "Rome does not know who died, the king or the accursed one." The church waited. The reformers raised their heads. Unrest broke out in Burgundy. In Rouen, priests were driven from their homes. Monasteries were closed. Rumors spread throughout France that Louis was not dead, but had gone into hiding, that his rotting body had been replaced, and that he himself was wandering through the forests, feeding on roots to atone for his sins. In the streets of Paris, Louis's name was whispered like a curse. Chroniclers did not mention him in their records. One monk even crossed out his name from the list of crowned heads. Fear of decay spread throughout the government. Peasants refused to bury the dead in royal land. In the village of Villeneuve, an icon depicting Louis was burned. One madman stabbed himself in the chest with a nail and cried out, "Now my heart is iron too." He was killed on the spot, but his name could not be erased. The documents left after his death were rewritten. Orders given in the last months were declared invalid. Decrees sealed with the royal seal were burned. Orders for executions were withdrawn. Only one archive survived, the one where the list of those pardoned was kept. Half of them were already dead. This is how the deception was discovered. One of the scribes, named Etienne, was interrogated. He said, "The king himself did not know whom he was pardoning. He was just trying to turn a blind eye to those who came to him at night." It was this fear of the night dead that became a symbol of the end of his reign. His iron heart, a symbol in which people believed during his lifetime, melted in the minds of the people into rotten bone. The metal cast for protection rusted away along with his soul. One of the physicians wrote in a private letter, "He burned himself from within. No poison was needed, only memory." France was left without a king during those months. Charles, young and weak, did not ascend the throne immediately. He was crowned 8 weeks after the funeral. The ceremony took place in a cold church with empty pews. The bishop who conducted the ceremony did not mention his father's name. When the choir began to sing the hymn, not everyone joined in. Many remained silent. Some cried, but not for Louis. Only one person cried for him, a monk named Dominic, who recorded his last words, "Farewell." No one knew to whom they were addressed. When the body decayed and memory faded, disputes over the inheritance began. Old men began to gather around Charles, a boy with the face of a baby and eyes unaccustomed to the light. Each party had a key to the throne. Each duke had a contract supposedly written by the dead king. Each priest had proof that he had been appointed to hear the confession, but had not arrived in time. Everyone wanted to correct what had not been completed. Everyone feared one thing, that the corpse would return. The royal court was deserted. The courtiers had left for the provinces. Only the executioners, archivists, and guards remained in Plessis. The treasury found sacks of ashes in the storeroom, traces of executions carried out without records. There were no names, there were no numbers, only bones and ashes. The servants said, "These are the ones he killed when he died." They said that after their last breath, the bodies began to dig themselves out. Monk Dominic disappeared. His diary was found behind the stove with the last entry. "He called me, but not with his voice. His body lies here, but his soul walks." He was never seen again. Rumor had it that he had gone barefoot to Vendée, where a hermit who had rejected the royal authority lived. There, his trail disappeared. Later, in one of the local chapels, a wall inscription was found. "Iron rusts longer, but it hurts more." 4 months after the king's death, an epidemic broke out in Toulouse. Buboes, fever, internal bleeding. The first case was an old judge who had previously participated in confiscations for the crown. A week later, his entire household died. 2 weeks later, half the city was dead. People began to say that the disease was coming from the north, from the place where the cursed one was rotting. The king's envoys tried to dissuade them, but to no avail. People burned their houses, boarded up their windows, and slaughtered their animals. They prayed not to God, but to the dead man, asking him not to touch them. Charles VIII, already crowned but without influence, ordered his father's coffin to be opened to dispel the rumors. At dawn on September 25th, the coffin was opened in the presence of 6 archbishops, 3 knights, and 2 doctors. The body was almost completely decomposed. Only the jaw remained of the face. An iron hoop embedded in the ribs had rusted and left a circular mark on the bone. A foul odor still emanated from inside the coffin. One of the archbishops fainted. Another died a week later. The remains were ordered to be reburied in a lead sarcophagus lined with salt, but the salt swelled up. The body did not absorb the purification. Then they decided to burn it, contrary to the rules, contrary to the law, contrary to fear. Everything took place in secret, in the forest near Tours. A wooden pyre, a body covered in tar, a ritual of silence. When everything was burned, only a bone remained. It was placed in an iron box and hidden in a wall. No one knew where. Charles ordered the execution of all those who participated, so that it would be forgotten, but it was impossible to forget. Archivist Antoine of Amboise wrote in his register, "Great France has become a country of memories. Everything that lives is waiting for the shadow to return." Stories circulated throughout the provinces. The king, rotting away, sits in the forest and writes a list of new sinners. Servants who had witnessed his suffering were declared possessed. Several suicides were reported in Paris. The cause, visions of a burnt face, whispering about iron. In the south of France, it was forbidden to name newborns Louis. In Toulouse, an inscription appeared on the gates of the cathedral. "He is dead, but more painful than alive." In Rouen, during morning mass, the bishop was covered in blood right on the pulpit. Someone said, "He has been touched by a shadow." Prayers were replaced by purification rituals. Crosses were nailed to blackened boards. God was silent, but everyone whispered the king's name. Charles VIII, frightened, renounced some of his father's decrees. He returned land to the churches. He abolished taxes. He pardoned hundreds of prisoners. But it was too late. There was no trust left. The people did not want a king. The people wanted oblivion, but there was none. Only fear. Fear of an iron heart that had not cooled even in the ashes. 6 months after the king's cremation, a secret chest was discovered in the royal treasury. Inside were scrolls written in Louis's hand. The handwriting was uneven, the lines trembling, stained with blood and grease. This was not an archive, it was a confession, or a parody of one. The first scroll, titled "My Path to Iron," read, "Powers decay, slow and merciless. I was the first to understand. If the soul is not afraid, the people must be afraid." Next were lists, officials sentenced to death without trial, names of priests dismissed on suspicion of sympathizing with the reform, children arrested as witnesses of a future rebellion. One list was marked with the word "Unforgiven." By the time it was read, everyone on the list was already dead. The second notebook contains notes about pain. 4th day, the skin under the iron is swollen. The 4th leech fell off by itself. The pus under my heart is hot. Prayers do not reach my ears. The corpses are silent, but I can hear them. There were also instructions for doctors. Administer opium every 8 hours, cut open abscesses in the groin area, and burn bandages immediately. And a note written in a different hand. He asked to have his fingernails pulled out so he wouldn't feel the tremors. The signature is illegible. The third contains neither a date nor a signature, only the phrase, "I am not afraid of hell. I am afraid of not being recognized in hell." These papers were not made public. Charles VIII ordered them to be burned, but one of the servants kept a copy. It reached a monastery in Langres, where it was copied into a chronicle called the Book of Night Words. It was there that the term "King of the Living Dead" first appeared. This text was later banned, but it was quoted in prisons and dungeons. It was used in interrogations. Beggars in Lyon memorized it, believing that every word was protection against the dead. Louis's death changed the church. Services in his memory were banned in Notre Dame Cathedral for more than 10 years. The priests who participated in the last rites either died or disappeared. One of them, Abbot Gautier, left a single note. "I held his hand. It was harder than stone, and in it there was no blood, no warmth, only willpower." After his death, France became a country of trials and frightened prayers. A legend arose that the Iron Heart had been preserved, that it had been hidden in the walls of a former Paris hospital. Several attempts were made to break into the building. One worker, named Raoul, claimed to have seen a niche inside where something was pulsing. They took him away. They didn't let him go. By the early 1490s, the memory of Louis had become a burden. His image was removed from all medals. His name was struck from government records. But the fear remained, especially in Touraine, where the locals refused to name their children after anyone until they were sure that person was truly dead. They kept bags of salt and iron plates in their homes to ward off the returning dead. The Archbishop of Tours wrote in a letter to Rome, "The dead king won't let France rise again. We live under the weight of his fear." The Pope didn't reply. Charles VIII died young, at the age of 28, under mysterious circumstances. His body was buried in the same place where Louis's ashes had once been hidden. Later, a pilgrim passing by left a note in a notebook. "I heard iron creaking in the ground. It has not yet cooled down." Thus ended the reign of a king who preferred to harden his heart rather than hear repentance. France emerged from this period weakened, frightened, and believing that true hell does not begin after death, but at the moment when a living person refuses to be human. And this was Louis's final legacy, a truth that stinks worse than rot and lives longer than power.